Hi everyone, and thanks for joining me today. Today we are talking about real estate scams that you need to be aware of if you own property or if you're in the process of buying. These scams have been costing hundreds of millions of dollars in losses. And to help us understand these scams and more importantly, to learn how not to become a victim in the first place, I have with me today my good friend and trusted title expert, Mark Stipkovich, Vice President of Sales of Lawyers Title Insurance Company. Hi, Mark. Thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. You know, you and I have worked together for many, many years. We're probably counting on 20. Time flies when you're having so much fun.
We were young when we started.
We were very young. I still like to think that we're still young. You know, whenever I get a call from a prospective seller saying, hey, Christina, come list my home, you are my first phone call or email because verifying ownership of a property is so important before you start taking any action, like listing a home, selling it, transferring title. And to have heard from you that your company and your brands alone have faced, did you say about like $50 million plus of like title fraud losses in the last year alone? This is like a shocking amount of information to take in. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what are some of these biggest title scams that we have been experiencing, and what can property owners and buyers do to protect themselves? So there are two that I want to talk with you about today. Let's start with the one that's affecting current owners of property.
So current owners of property. So when we talk about the losses, our brands, the F&F brands, we probably do about 60% of title insurance in Southern California.
Okay.
And the $50 million figure was probably in the last calendar year just in Southern California.
Oh my gosh.
With actual title theft fraud.
Okay, so that's the first type of fraud that we're going to be talking about is actual title theft. What is title theft?
So a lot of people will hear these commercials, you know, lock your title, protect your title, and certain things like that.
Yeah.
Those companies are good and they're effective, but they're really only for a certain group of people that are falling victim to this type of fraud. If you're a normal homeowner, you have a loan on your property, you live there, you don't need a vehicle to protect your title,
Okay.
right? The targets that criminals are going after to steal properties are typically vacant land or vacant properties or absentee owned properties by people that are typically out of state or out of the country. So kind of how it works is, I have a very good example actually. Client of mine purchased a property in Sherman Oaks. Mm-hmm. 2 weeks later, they get a phone call from the owner that says, hey, why is your name showing up on my title? And they're like, I purchased that property. This is a client of mine. I purchased that property. I'm like, no, you didn't, because I never listed it.
Oh my gosh.
So then, of course, I become the first phone call.
Yeah.
Right? Luckily for me, we did not insure that deal.
So you did your research, yeah.
Yeah, so it was a very alarming phone call. But this person purchased a $2 million property that was a vacant home in Sherman Oaks, owned by a person that lived in Canada, right? So somebody frauded a birth certificate, frauded a driver's license, frauded this, was able to close that transaction, get $2 million with a $2 million all cash transaction, and then all of a sudden my client, who paid $2 million all cash because they were planning on rehabbing it and flipping it, they had to go through the title claims process. Luckily, it took about 6 months, right? It's not going to happen quickly. It took about 6 months. Everybody has to do their research and figure out what's going on and try to find somebody accountable for it. But they were made whole. They got all of their money back, plus the money they put into it. So at the end of the day, that's one of the main reasons for title insurance is to protect yourself against that type of fraud, right? Had they tried to close that transaction without title insurance, well, they would have lost $2 million.
Right. So walk me through this, okay? This fraudulent owner in Canada.
Well, that's the actual owner. The actual owner is in Canada.
Oh, the actual owner
is
lives
in Canada.
Okay, hence, which is what you were saying, his property was actually stolen. So this is what the title theft is. It's actually property theft. Somebody is claiming to be the owner of your property and lists it
They're calling
and tries to
you up
sell
to
it.
go list their home for sale. You're like, score, I just got a $2 million listing
Right.
in Sherman Oaks. This is awesome, right? But you never meet this person in person because they're in Canada. You know, maybe you have some conversations on the phone. You're just happy you got a listing.
Right.
Right? And so you list it for sale and it goes on the market and then you get a buyer in. And then, you know, escrow is kind of the first line of defense when it kind of
Right.
comes to this because let's face it, a lot of these criminals are very good at what they do, but usually there will be some smell in the air about
Right.
something
Something's off.
not being right. And that's usually what we deal with and we're very good at it. A good escrow officer is really going to be on top of that and try to protect everybody involved, especially protect the title insurance company because ultimately we're the one that's going to have to write that
Paying
check.
out, right.
And what's interesting is the escrow officer that closed this transaction, this wasn't the first deal that they closed with this type of fraudulent activity. So now we
I
do not
see.
do business with that
With that escrow
escrow company any longer because we don't know if they're in cahoots or not, but they're not looking out for anybody's best
The client's
interest.
best interest, yeah.
Correct. And so,
What are some of those telltale signs that escrow would look for? Because, I mean, you're right. Oftentimes, as real estate agents, you get a phone call from somebody who says, hi, I would like to list my home. Normally, you would go to the home, you would meet them. I call you, I order a preliminary title report. I want to get that report from you to see who owns it, what's the rightful name, is it under an LLC, then, do I, get like the articles of incorporation, make sure that I know who the underlying person is because you don't want to get into these situations that you can avoid. So short of, meeting the person at the property, for example, make sure that they have the keys, they're not some phantom person that you're never going to meet. What are some of these signs that escrow companies should be looking for?
yeah, the reality is you as a listing agent, I mean, I say escrow, that's when it's in transaction, but you can do a lot of research on your end, right? So I get a lot of clients that are like, oh, this vacant land listing, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, let me do some research for
Yeah.
you. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm like, ask them about their daughter, ask them about this, start asking them questions, right?
Personal
Type questions, right? Because there's a lot of resources out there, especially for agents. There's an app called Forewarn, which I highly recommend every agent download, use. It's almost like LexisNexis for your phone. So it's really for security purposes, right? To protect, because there's criminal history and criminal record on there.
Right.
But if you know a lot about the person and we can discover a lot about the person, you can ask them little questions or get them on a Zoom and have a conversation, right? There's no way they're going to know the whole story of this particular owner.
Right.
And if they're hesitant to hop on a Zoom or they're only willing to communicate certain times or they end up ghosting you for a certain period of time or they're like, oh, I'm only willing to work with this particular escrow office. Like,
Right.
or, oh, no, we're only going to do it this way. If they're not malleable to how a transaction is supposed to work, right? Those are kind of your initial red flags.
Red flags.
Initial
Right.
red flags, right?
Right.
Vacant land is just fraudulent, like across the board. Like people are just getting phone calls. Oh, I want to list my property for sale. My property for sale. It's almost like it's
It just seems like a very easy target.
low-hanging fruit.
So, when we're talking about this title theft, which is literally somebody stealing your property from you, pretending to be the owner, and turning around, listing it, oftentimes with a legitimate listing agreement, but it's not really legitimate because of the fraud that's happening.
Correct.
But the contract
You
is
think
there.
it's- you think
the
it's right.
property's in the MLS or it's on Zillow or these various sites. A buyer is searching for a home. Gosh, this home looks beautiful. It's perfect.
What a deal, because
What
it's
a
probably going to be a little
deal.
under market.
Right. What a great deal. They'll write an offer on it. The buyer and their agent goes through their procedures, escrow is opened, and maybe inspections are done. The deal closes. Everything, a successful fraudulent situation would include all of these factors.
100%.
The property's listed, there is a listing contract. Everything is all normal and above board except for the ownership.
Correct.
And the ownership usually has no idea that this is happening.
Correct.
Because normally, like you said, the lowest hanging fruit, they're not nearby. to keep an eye on the property to see, oh gosh, there are a lot of people going in and out of the home, or to see a for sale sign. And also they own the property free and clear, typically, because
free and clear is huge.
is that the number one criteria, if you will, for these fraudulent actors
Absolutely.
to make sure that they're not taking on ownership of a property where there's going to be a giant loan to pay off?
When you have to pay a loan off, there's lots of security going on with identity and the lender, and they're going to verify lots of stuff, right? So no criminal is going to go after a property that is encumbered with a loan.
Right.
Right. So it's paid off properties with no loan. Those are going to be the number one targets.
As a property owner of one of these paid off homes, assuming they're also absentee, what can one of these homeowners do to minimize being at risk for something
that's
like this?
where those websites like Title Lock or certain there's a couple of them. I can give them to you after if you want to put it on the chat. But
awesome.
But like Title Lock, you see these ads targeting, ooh, protect your title, lock your title, title theft, right? Majority of people do not fall into this category. But if you do, it's absolutely, usually these sites cost like maybe $100 a month. And what they do is they actually will, with the county recorder's office, lock your title, meaning that you cannot record anything.
Oh, it's like locking your credit.
Correct.
Through like TransUnion or Experian
Correct.
or Equifax, you
Correct.
put a lock on your credit so that if you wanted to like apply for a loan or a credit card and they're trying to check your credit score, they can't.
Correct.
Until you unlock it. And if somebody tries, then you get notified that somebody's
Correct.
trying to make a hard inquiry on your credit. So it's like locking your
It's
credit,
very
but
similar to that.
for house. Okay. All right.
Exactly. So that's really the only sort of protection that they have, right? I think with vacant homes, right, having neighbors that you can talk to, that you can pick up the phone and say, hey, people are coming in or people are coming out. A lot of them will get picked up like that.
Right.
Which is why the vacant land becomes a lot easier target, but not as much money.
Well, vacant homes can also
money.
fall victim to squatters and that kind of stuff. So having surveillance cameras, security systems, and just good old neighbor
Good old-fashioned neighbors,
Yeah.
Like, it was shocking to me that they were able to do that transaction at a very nice home in Sherman Oaks.
I mean, Sherman Oaks, it's heavily populated. You're not in the boonies somewhere. So, oh my gosh, that is such a crazy situation.
Yeah. And they happen more often than you'd think.
Wow. Yeah. Well, I mean, thank God there was some, form of insurance on that property.
This wasn't even one of our brands. So our $50 million, that went into somebody else's $50 million pool.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
So when people complain about title insurance fees, and in fact, California has some of the lowest title insurance fees in the country.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Our fees are quite low compared to the rest of the country, especially based on the price point. But that loss went to another underwriter, not us.
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm glad everybody was made whole. What are the chances that the bad actors actually get caught? Like, can you track them? Who gets them? Does the FBI get involved? I mean, who gets involved?
So FinCEN, the federal watchdog for basically fraud and money laundering, all that sort of stuff. Everything that we do, we pass on to FinCEN. So a lot of times when an all-cash buyer, and you've probably experienced this, an all-cash buyer is buying a property in like Hollywood Hills or Beverly Hills, and it's $10 million all cash, right? Well, they're required to fill out a form.
Oh,
basically
absolutely.
with their identity. Right?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if it's a corporation, LLC, trust, anything. Like, we want to know who all these people are involved. And we can't close without that informational sheet. All we do with that informational sheet is pass it along to the federal government. We don't look at it, we don't vet it. In fact, we don't even usually report the fraud. We just pass it along to the federal government and let them do their thing.
I see. Okay, yeah. So the people in charge of dealing with the fraud is the federal government.
Yeah, it's FinCEN. That's where it starts. So, and then eventually it would lead to an FBI investigation.
Wow.
So the answer to the question is, do these people get caught? I mean, I think eventually everybody gets caught.
Yeah.
But it depends on what scale they're doing it at, and is this we'll get into wire fraud in a second, but is this is this a one-off? Is this a crew? Is this organized?
Kind of like that potential, like that escrow company you were saying. This was not the first time that there was this kind of title fraud that had happened. It's very possible that they could be in cahoots
You
with
could
each
have
other.
escrow. You could have a lender. You could have an appraiser. You can have lots of people involved in this.
I mean, when you think about the sheer number of people that touch a file from start to finish, from listing to escrow to closing, so many people. And I don't think the consumers truly realize how many people are involved in a real estate transaction. So to your point, it's hard to do it if you're just one person. Usually there might have to be somebody else involved somewhere if you were successfully committing this crime over and over and over again. You definitely have a system.
You would think.
Yeah, you would think.
If I was doing that system, I would have some peeps.
You would have peeps. We're not advocating having peeps in this. Oh, man.
I don't think I could pull it off by myself.
No, I mean, due to the sheer fact that so many people are involved, which is why it's really important in a transaction also that you know the companies that you're working with. You know, as a listing agent who does her diligence before taking a listing, you know, I like to control who escrow is, title is. You know, I like to choose my service providers. And sometimes, especially as a buyer's agent, you don't always have control of who the service providers are. Typically, the sellers end up selecting the services. It's always negotiable, but typically it's in favor of the sellers. And I've had transactions where, you know, I've never heard of this escrow company or I've never heard of this title company. And while it's not the end of the world, I know I've called you before. Have you heard of this title company? Who are they underwritten by? You know, and it's like, okay, it's a big name brand that's reliable and trustworthy. I'm okay going with it. So it is important to be educated and smart and just ask the questions.
I do a lot of work on files that are not my files, right? Because they might be dealing with, you know, a subpar escrow or a subpar title company. There's a lot of them out there.
Yeah.
Most are very good, but you know, there is those bad apples. But you're also very, very good at what you do, and you're putting in the time and the research to make sure that all those boxes are checked. Right?
I'm anal retentive when it comes to this.
You're very good at it. You're very good at it, right? And if I'm not getting back to you in time, you're going to remind me that I need to do it, right?
No, but you always get back to me in time. You're on it.
But not everybody in our industry has that level of professionalism.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it.
It's the truth, right? Yeah. If everybody did, we would be dealing with a lot less of this.
Yeah. I think you had brought up a really good transition into wire fraud a minute ago when you mentioned that, and that's the second topic that I would like for us to discuss today, because whereas the title theft, the property theft, affects current owners of property, wire fraud is really geared towards buyers. And once your money ends up in the wrong hands, it is nearly impossible to get it back. So let's talk about wire fraud. What is it? When does it usually come into play? And what are some things that our buyer clients can do to not fall victim?
Wire fraud is the worst because there's really no protection against it. And it is the number one vehicle for fraud out there. I can tell you, we'll just start from the beginning. The beginning, if you are a buyer, don't ever wire money without picking up the phone and talking to escrow or talking to title. You might get a text message. You might get an email that says from you. It looks like it's coming directly from you.
Right.
Oh, we need to close escrow. Wire your money here ASAP. Right? No. You're never going to get do you ever tell a client to wire money?
No,
never. Of course not. So what's going to happen is there's people that are hacking all of our stuff all the time. I got a message from the United States Post Office today that I needed to verify this link to get this package that's supposed to be sent to my house. I don't have a package coming to my house, right? So we're constantly getting these links that are trying to get into our phone, they're trying to get into our emails. And it's very easy for people to hit the wrong link and then boom, they have access to their computer and they're just monitoring and watching it, especially real estate agents, right? You guys have so much stuff going on, right? So once they get access to your computer, they're just monitoring a transaction, right? So they're monitoring. And then right at the end, right, they're going to send an email to the buyer pretending to be escrow, pretending to be title.
Yeah.
It's going to look legit.
Email signatures and everything.
It is going to look legit.
Yeah.
One digit changed on the little wiring instructions.
Yeah.
And let's face it, you're buying in LA County, you're probably pretty busy because it's pretty expensive to buy in LA County,
Yes.
right?
Probably working very hard
You're
to buy
working,
your home.
you're working really hard, you're working long hours, maybe
Yeah.
you got kids, you're running around town, you're shuffling, you're trying to do all this kind of stuff, right? The last thing you want to do is pick up the phone and verify. You're just like, oh, just get it done. You might even tell your assistant to go do it or somebody in your office, like a manager, oh, just do this for me, right? Get it off my plate, right? Do not. You pick up the phone. Anytime you're going to wire any substantial amount of money, pick up the phone and verify. Escrow will appreciate it, title will appreciate it, everybody will appreciate it.
Especially your bank account.
And if you can't get to it right away and you need to close escrow tomorrow, well, guess what? Delay for a day.
Right.
It's better than losing $500,000, $1 million, because once that goes, right, and it usually takes about 2 hours before it clears federal banking. Once it clears federal banking, you're at huge risk.
Like you're never getting that money back.
It's not never, because it really, there's that 24 to 48 hour window where they're able to kind of track and stop certain things, because I believe a lot of these guys are bouncing this money around a little bit. So I've seen it recouped in the past, but it's usually like they're catching it like that day. You know what I mean? If it's the next day, you're at great risk of losing the money.
Chances of recovery are
and there's no
minimal.
There's no recourse. There's no protection. There's no title insurance. There's no
because it's
wire.
just cash. The money's gone.
You've sent it to the wrong person.
Right. Unbeknownst to you.
Unbeknownst to you.
Now there are 2 points in a transaction typically when money is wired. One is at the very beginning.
Yep. It won't happen then.
It usually won't happen then because it's a little too early in the transaction. And even still, because at that point in time, there's really no escrow that has been happening for a period of time to be monitored. Even still, I tell my clients, look, you're going to be getting an email from escrow, a secured email, regular email, whatever it ends up being. Here's the phone number to the escrow company. Here is your officer's name. Call them, speak with them, and confirm the information. The second point, which is where it's more dangerous, is where the balance of your purchase funds are going. So it doesn't matter whether you're putting 10% down or 20% down, or it's an all cash deal.
It's a large amount.
It is a large amount of money. So there are really these 2 points where a buyer's funds could be so very vulnerable. The first one less so, but it's not like it couldn't happen.
It's not like it couldn't happen.
It's
just if they're monitoring it, it's going to be harder to time and harder to get a hold of, and it's usually only going to be 3%, right?
Right.
Right.
But still, to the point that you made, people are working very, very hard to be able to afford to buy their homes here in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
So even if it's 3%, even if it's 1%, you don't want to lose that because you work
but you can recover
so
from
hard.
that. It's hard to recover from 20%.
Exactly. I had a situation with a client where we were actually able to avoid that happening to him because he did, in fact, call escrow. He picked up the phone like I told him to, spoke with the escrow officer, called to confirm the information.
It was wrong.
And it was wrong.
It happens.
It does
every
happen.
day.
And, you think, oh, it'll never happen to me until it does,
And you're devastated.
And then you're devastated. But thank God, he picked up the phone. He's a very busy professional. He's actually, he's in real estate himself. He sells commercial property. I'm his residential broker. And he picked up the phone, made the phone call, found that the instructions were wrong,
But he was also in the industry, so he probably had a little higher level of knowledge.
Yes.
I think some of the people that might be on here, they don't understand how prevalent it can be.
No, they don't. That's why I make it a really big deal.
Yeah.
Like, I make it a really big deal to talk about this, because I know how hard my clients are working for their money. They should not have to fall prey to this, especially because this is so preventable.
Yeah.
Like, this is completely preventable if you pick up the phone and
This is for the younger generation, the under 40s that don't like to pick up the phone.
Yes.
You're going to have to go old school for a moment
pick up the phone
to save yourself, maybe hundreds of thousands
of dollars. Exactly. Yeah. Is there anything about the wire fraud that we haven't covered, or is that pretty much?
That's that's it. I mean, we've talked about how it can happen. We've talked about how to prevent it, and that's the biggest thing. Just don't send any large amount of money without picking up the phone and verifying. Yeah. Don't do it off of an email. Don't do it off of a text.
Yeah.
It's pick up the phone.
Because these fraudsters are getting so sophisticated with their use of technology.
Off subject, I believe the next wave of it's going to be using our voices AI to get people to send money.
I totally 100% believe that. You know, I used to answer my phone calls with my name.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't
like,
anymore.
Yeah. It happened to me 2-3 times this morning. I was like, hello. Okay, keep recording me. I don't say that anymore. But I'm like, no, when is this coming? You know what I mean?
It's totally happening. Yeah. I mean, we've definitely heard of technology and AI being used obviously in some incredible ways that are helping.
Of course.
Further advance and help humanity, and then there will always be a certain subset of people who are going to use it to harm people and do bad things. So I think the awareness is really key, and not to necessarily just like be afraid and live in a hole and like not transact and just hide from the world, but just be really smart about things, be aware, take in information, make that phone call, go buy that title lock policy, just do what you need to do to cover your bases. And if you do everything that is in your power, at least you can rest easy. And there are ways that you can recoup from fraudulent situations like this.
They're looking for easy prey. They're looking for the simple.
Targets.
The easy targets, right?
Yeah.
If you're doing a little bit of due diligence on your behalf, you're going to be fine.
Awesome. Thank you so much. You're enlightening as always. You and I have a lot more to talk about, but we'll save that for the next video.
Okay.
I want to thank you all for joining me. Such a pleasure being with you and sharing great information. If there is anything that I can help you with real estate-wise, you know how to reach me. Take care.